You're only here because of charity. If you've ever had someone say something so cruel that it echoed in your ears for days, you'll understand why I'm telling this story. My name is Elena Ward, and I was standing by the vending machine in the hallway of Willow Heights Academy when I heard those words hissed behind my back. I hadn't even turned around yet, but my chest felt hot, like my ribs were about to crack open from the pressure. It wasn't the first time I'd heard a comment like that, but it was the first time it made me wonder if keeping my secret was really worth it. You see, everyone at Willow Heights thought I was here on some kind of scholarship, that I'd lucked into a place among the rich kids because the school needed to fill some quota or look good in a glossy brochure. No one ever guessed that the truth was far stranger and far more humiliating for them than it ever was for me. I tightened my grip on the Diet Coke can and slowly turned around. Claire Stevenson and her little entourage were standing there, smirking like they'd just shared the world's funniest joke. Claire was exactly the kind of person who assumed her family name bought her immunity from decency. Her father was on the board, her mother chaired half the charity galas in town, and she never let anyone forget it. "Is something funny?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. Claire widened her eyes in that faux innocent way she'd perfected since kindergarten. "Nothing at all," she said, but the way her lip curled told the truth. "I just think it's inspiring how you show up here every day, knowing you don't really belong." Behind her, I saw two other girls swallow hard, looking away. They weren't as bold as Claire, but none of them ever dared to stand up to her either. That was how it worked. The powerful kids made the rules. The rest just tried to survive them. I could have told her right then. Could have said, "Actually, sweetheart, I own this place." But I didn't. Because the truth was more complicated and, in a way, more satisfying. My grandfather had founded Willow Heights Academy in the 1950s. When he died, he left the controlling shares to my mother. And when she passed away suddenly 2 years ago, every dusty old deed and document ended up in my name. No one knew because I never saw the point in broadcasting it. I didn't need their approval. I certainly didn't want their pity. But that morning, as Claire's words slithered around my heart, I felt something shift. Maybe it was the exhaustion of pretending I owed this place anything. Maybe it was the certainty that they would never stop trying to remind me I wasn't one of them, even when I was so much more than they'd ever be. "Charity," I repeated softly like I was testing the taste of the word. "You think that's why I'm here?" Claire tilted her head. "Oh, don't pretend you don't know. Everybody does. You just keep showing up anyway, like you're hoping someone will forget." I could feel my pulse beating in my fingertips. All I wanted was to leave, to escape the glare of their judgment. But a different part of me, a braver part I'd buried under years of silence, was tired of giving them the satisfaction. So I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I knew something they didn't. Something that would unravel every assumption they'd ever made about me. "I guess we'll see," I said calmly. Sometimes the truth has a way of showing up when you least expect it. I walked away then, my heart pounding so hard it blurred the edges of my vision. But even as I rounded the corner, I knew this wasn't over. For the first time, I was ready to stop hiding. And I didn't care who was watching when I finally told them everything. I sat alone in the library for the rest of the morning, pretending to read The Great Gatsby while my mind drifted to that last conversation with my mother. I could still see her, propped up against her pillows in the hospital bed, her hair thinner than I'd ever seen it, her voice no more than a whisper. She'd reached for my hand and pressed a thin envelope into my palm. "Elena," she'd rasped, "promise me you won't let them define you." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. I thought she was talking about the neighbors who whispered that my mother had married down, or about the relatives who treated her like a disappointment because she'd never chased after more money. But after she was gone, I opened that envelope and read the letter that changed everything. It detailed the trust she'd established, the controlling shares of Willow Heights Academy she had quietly secured after my grandfather's passing, The papers were crisp and official, embossed with the Academy's seal. It felt surreal, like holding a piece of someone else's life. I was 23 then, fresh out of college and numb with grief. The school was the last thing on my mind. I filed the documents away in my mother's cedar chest and told myself I'd deal with it later. But later came faster than I expected. When the Board of Trustees convened last year, a polite older gentleman named Mr. Ashcroft reached out to me. He asked if I wanted to assume a more public role as the school's owner. I'd declined, explaining that I preferred to remain anonymous. He'd respected that wish, though I could tell he didn't agree with it. "One day," he'd said gently, "you'll want them to know." Back then, I didn't. The thought of stepping into the spotlight, of announcing that I was the quiet beneficiary of everything they took for granted, it was too much, too soon. But as I watched the golden afternoon sunlight filtering through the stained glass window of the library, I wondered if my silence had become its own form of cowardice. I thought about Claire and her sneering words, about the dozens of other kids who assumed I was charity, a burden they had to tolerate, about how many times I'd swallowed my pride to avoid being labeled the girl who thought she was special. Wasn't it ironic that I'd done all of this to keep from standing out and ended up feeling like I never really belonged? The bell rang, snapping me back to the present. I gathered my books and walked down the hall, feeling the heavy thump of my shoes on the polished tile. My locker was on the far end, right past the principal's office. As I approached, I heard Principal Foster's low voice inside, tinged with frustration. "She's been through enough," he was saying. "I won't tolerate any more harassment." My stomach flipped. Was he talking about me? I stood still, debating whether to keep walking, when the door opened. He looked up, startled. "Elena," he said, voice softening, "would you come in for a moment?" I stepped inside, and he gestured for me to sit across from his massive oak desk. "I heard about what happened this morning," he said. You don't have to tolerate that. If you'd like to make a formal complaint, the board will back you." The board, my board. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but instead I thanked him and said I'd think about it. He watched me for a moment, as if he knew there was something I wasn't telling him. "You have more power here than you realize," he said quietly. "Don't be afraid to use it." When I left his office, my heart was beating with a different kind of determination. Maybe it was time to stop pretending I was just another girl lucky to be here. Maybe it was time to honor my mother's memory and take my place in the legacy she entrusted to me. I didn't know exactly how I'd do it, but as I walked out into the bright courtyard, I felt for the first time in a long while that I was finally ready. That evening, I drove home with my window cracked, letting the warm breeze pull at my hair. I lived in a small bungalow on the edge of town, nothing like the sprawling estates most Willow Heights families called home. I'd chosen it deliberately. After my mother passed, everyone assumed I'd move into the old family house, a stately Victorian on the hill overlooking the town square. But that house was full of ghosts, memories of her illness, the quiet weeping at night when she thought I couldn't hear, the way she'd look at me with both fierce love and an apology she never voiced. So I sold it, gave half the proceeds to a local children's charity she supported, and used the rest to buy this place. A modest, sunlit home with a garden out back and a kitchen just big enough for two. No one at school knew. They assumed I lived in a cramped apartment, scraping by on tuition grants, and for a long time I let them think that. It was simpler, cleaner. But now I was tired of living behind a curtain. After I kicked off my shoes and fed my cat, I retrieved the cedar chest from my bedroom closet. My hands were trembling as I opened it, the faint scent of lavender rising from the folds of old letters and silk scarves. At the very bottom, under a stack of yellowing photographs, were the documents that proved everything: the shareholder agreements, the deed transfers, the final notarized letter from my grandfather naming my mother, and now me, as the majority owner of Willow Heights Academy. I ran my fingertips over the embossed seal, All this time, I'd carried it like a secret burden instead of what it truly was, a testament to everything my family had built. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Mr. Ashcroft's number. My thumb hovered over the call button, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Was I really ready? I thought about Claire's voice slicing through me that morning, about Principal Foster's gentle insistence that I didn't have to keep enduring it. And I thought about my mother, her voice hoarse but certain. Promise me you won't let them define you. I pressed call. Mr. Ashcroft picked up on the second ring. "Elena," he greeted warmly. "What can I do for you?" "I'd like to schedule a meeting," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "With the board. It's time we clarified a few things." There was a pause. When he spoke again, there was something almost relieved in his tone. "I'll arrange it," he said. "I think your mother would be very proud." After we hung up, I sat there in the quiet, staring at the documents spread across my coffee table. The cat leapt up beside me and curled into my side, purring. Maybe it would be messy. Maybe people would resent me for keeping this hidden. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for the space I occupied. I'd spent so many years shrinking myself, hoping to avoid the sting of other people's opinions. And all it had done was give them permission to keep hurting me. I wouldn't let that happen anymore. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I ironed my best dress, the navy one with the pearl buttons my mother used, to say made me look undeniably yourself. I braided my hair back from my face, applied a little makeup, and slipped the documents into a slim leather portfolio. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I barely recognized, a woman who was tired of pretending she had to earn her place, and I felt ready to show them exactly who I was and who I'd always been. By 8 o'clock sharp, I was standing in the walnut-paneled boardroom of Willow Heights Academy. The long conference table gleamed under the antique brass chandelier, the scent of polished wood and faint lemon oil rising from every surface. I'd sat in this room once before, right after my mother's funeral, when Mr. Ashcroft first explained what I'd inherited. But that day, I'd felt too raw and broken to process any of it. I'd signed papers and nodded politely, desperate to escape. Today was different. Today, I felt like every step I'd taken since my mother's death had led me here. One by one, the board members filed in, men and women in tailored suits, most of them old enough to have known my grandfather. They greeted me politely, though a few looked puzzled to see me at the head of the table instead of in one of the guest chairs. Mr. Ashcroft settled into the seat beside me, offering an encouraging nod. When everyone was assembled, he cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began. "Elena has requested this meeting to clarify her role in the Academy's governance." A murmur rippled around the table. I took a deep breath and opened the leather portfolio. I pulled out the stack of documents, proof that for the past 2 years I'd been their majority shareholder, their employer in every sense. "My mother," I began, voice clear, "held controlling shares in Willow Heights Academy, passed down from my grandfather. When she died, those shares were transferred to me." I placed the papers in the center of the table. No one reached for them at first. Some of the board members simply stared, their faces blank with disbelief. "I've chosen to remain anonymous," I continued, "because I didn't want my presence here to become a spectacle. But recent events have made it clear that my silence is causing more harm than good." One of the trustees, a severe-looking woman named Mrs. Whitcomb, folded her hands. "Ms. Ward," she said slowly, "are you suggesting you have full decision-making authority over this institution?" I met her gaze without flinching. "Yes," I said simply. Silence. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Another board member cleared his throat. "With respect," he said, choosing his words carefully, "why reveal this now?" I thought of Claire and her sneering face, of every whispered remark and dismissive glance I'd endured. "Because I'm tired of pretending," I said. "I'm tired of watching students, especially those without old family names, be treated like they're less than everyone else. I paused to steady my breath. This academy was founded on the belief that education should elevate people, not diminish them. I intend to see that vision restored. Mr. Ashcroft spoke then, his voice warm with approval. I believe Elena's mother would have agreed, he said, and as her successor, she is well within her rights to assume a more active role. There was more discussion, some measured, some uneasy, but no one challenged the documents. They couldn't. They were legally airtight. When the meeting finally adjourned, Mr. Ashcroft rested a hand on my shoulder. "You did well," he murmured. "Sometimes the hardest thing is to stop hiding." I felt something loosen in my chest, like I could finally breathe without bracing for impact. As I walked out into the hallway, I caught my reflection in the glass display case. For the first time, I didn't see the girl they thought was here on someone else's charity. I saw the woman who owned this place and was finally ready to claim it. But I wasn't finished yet, because there were still a few people who needed to hear it from me directly. The school day was already in full swing when I stepped into the main corridor. Students hurried past me, their chatter echoing off the high ceilings. I could have waited, sent out a formal announcement, scheduled a polite meeting with the faculty. But something in me insisted that if I was going to reclaim my place, I had to do it face to face. I walked toward the senior wing, where Claire and her friends usually gathered between classes to gossip. My heels clicked against the marble floor, steady and purposeful, even as adrenaline made my hands tremble. Sure enough, I spotted them near the lockers, clustered together like always. Claire was leaning against the wall, phone in hand, her perfect blonde hair spilling over her shoulders. As I approached, she glanced up, and her expression flickered with confusion, then annoyance. "Can we help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with mock politeness. I stopped a few feet away, meeting her gaze evenly. "Actually, yes," I said. "There's something I think you, and everyone else, should hear." The hallway grew quieter as a few students slowed to watch. Claire shifted, her lips parting like she was about to unleash another rehearsed insult, but I didn't give her the chance. "For years," I began, my voice carrying farther than I expected, "some of you have assumed I'm here because of charity, because this school was forced to take me." A few heads turned. Murmurs started to ripple through the crowd gathering behind me. "The truth," I continued, reaching into my bag for the slim folder, "is that this academy was founded by my grandfather. My family has owned it since the day the first brick was laid." I opened the folder and held up the document, the notarized letter from my grandfather naming my mother and then me as the controlling shareholder. "You're lying," Claire blurted, her face paling. "No," I said calmly, "I'm not." Mr. Ashcroft appeared then, as if summoned by fate itself. He stood beside me, his presence quiet but undeniable. "It's true," he said, addressing the small crowd. "Elena is the majority owner of Willow Heights Academy." You could have heard a pin drop. Claire's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Behind her, the other girls stared at me like they'd never really seen me before. I felt the strangest mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the truth was finally in the open, and sadness that it had ever come to this. "I don't share this to embarrass anyone," I said, my voice softer now, "but I'm done letting rumors and cruelty define who I am." For a moment, no one moved. Then a girl near the back, Maya, who'd always been kind in her shy way, began to clap. Slowly, the sound spread, uncertain at first, then stronger. Claire's eyes darted around, her composure fracturing. "This doesn't change anything," she hissed, her voice tight. "You're still—" "Still what?" I asked gently. Her words died on her tongue. She looked away. Mr. Ashcroft cleared his throat. "I believe that's quite enough," he said. "Thank you for your attention, everyone. You may return to class." Students began to disperse, some sneaking curious glances over their shoulders. But I stayed where I was, meeting Claire's gaze one last time. "You don't have to like me," I told her, "but you will respect me." I turned and walked away, my heart pounding, Not from fear, but from the fierce certainty that I'd finally stopped hiding. By the time I reached the main office, I felt lighter than I had in years, but as I stepped inside, Principal Foster was waiting with a quiet smile. "There's someone here who wants to thank you," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Who?" He stepped aside, and the last person I expected was standing there, holding a bouquet of blue hydrangeas. The bouquet was so out of place in the sterile front office that it took me a full second to realize who was holding it. Mrs. Dalton, the head of the scholarship committee, stood there in her navy suit and sensible shoes, blinking back what looked suspiciously like tears. "Elena," she began, her voice unsteady, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion." I swallowed, feeling the knot in my throat tighten. "Of course," I said, stepping closer. "Is everything all right?" She held the flowers out to me with hands that trembled just a little. "I should have come to you much sooner," she said. "Your mother, she did more for this school than most people ever knew, and I think deep down I suspected that one day you'd step into her place." I accepted the bouquet, the petals cool and velvety against my skin. "You knew?" I asked softly. Mrs. Dalton smiled faintly. "I knew the outline of it, not all the details. Your mother once told me that she hoped you'd find your own way to claim what was yours." My chest tightened. The weight of everything, my mother's trust, the years I'd spent shrinking into the shadows, suddenly felt heavy again. "She didn't want you to feel obligated," Mrs. Dalton continued gently, "but I think she also knew that one day you'd be ready." I set the flowers carefully on the counter and took a steadying breath. "I almost wasn't," I admitted. "I thought that if I stayed invisible, I'd avoid all this judgment, the cruelty." She nodded. "People fear what they don't understand, and sometimes what they envy." I thought of Claire's face when the truth had finally landed, the way her voice had faltered, how small she looked when she realized she didn't have the power to shame me anymore. "I'm not sure what comes next," I confessed. Mrs. Dalton's eyes warmed. "Whatever it is, you won't have to do it alone." At that moment, Principal Foster stepped out of his office. His gaze moved from Mrs. Dalton to me, and a small, proud smile curved his mouth. "I've already spoken to the board," he said. "They're ready to support you in any way you need." The words sank in slowly. For so long, I'd convinced myself that stepping into my family's legacy would mean isolation, that revealing the truth would only make me a target. But standing there, in the bright morning light streaming through the office windows, I realized something simpler and truer. The only thing more exhausting than being underestimated was pretending I didn't care. I did care. I cared about this place, about what it could become if the right people were brave enough to shape it. And maybe, finally, that person was me. I lifted my chin. "I'd like to set up a meeting with the faculty," I said. "And I'd like to establish a new initiative, one that guarantees any student who works hard has a place here, regardless of background." Mrs. Dalton's face lit up, her eyes bright with something like hope. "That's exactly what your mother wanted," she whispered. Principal Foster extended his hand. "It would be my honor to help you," he said. As I shook it, I felt the last remnants of fear loosen their hold on me. Outside, the bell rang, signaling the start of a new period. Students rushed past the windows in a blur of uniforms and backpacks. For the first time, I didn't feel separate from them. I felt like I finally belonged here, on my own terms. And as I picked up the bouquet and turned to leave, I knew this was only the beginning.